Hello. Today we're going to look at how we overwinter plants. What is overwintering plants and why do we need to do it? Well, some plants are what we call fully hardy in the area that we live in, which means that they can survive the rigours of the winter quite happily. And there are other plants which can't survive the rigours of our winter because they originate from possibly warmer climes. So we need to protect them in some way during the winter. So let's first look at the plants that don't need protecting during the winter. And here I have an example. It's a small yew tree. You think of most trees, some deciduous trees lose their leaves and just survive the winter and then grow new leaves in the spring. And other evergreen trees, like this small yew tree, don't lose their leaves. They just remain like this. They wait through the winter, they don't grow anymore, they just stop growing, but they wait for the winter to pass and then they start growing again in the spring. So here, this is a fully hardy plant where I live, a lovely little yew tree that needs, in fact, no kind of overwintering protection at all. Now, certain plants in the garden are annual plants and they have their whole cycle of life from spring through to the end of summer, and then they lay seed which lies dormant until the following spring or even later years. But here, with our perennial plants, some have another strategy for surviving the winter. A perennial plant is simply a plant that lives for a number of years. Here I have a lovely little rhubarb, and the strategy here is similar to a lot of plants with bulbs, tubers, rhizomes, corms or big root systems. What it does is everything above ground dies back as we enter autumn, and all the energy of this plant is concentrated underground. What happens is it lies there quite happily during the winter and awaits for warmer weather when again it'll start pushing up stems and leaves. So again, another strategy. One thing we can do with plants like this, we can sometimes put a little organic mulch over the area where the plant is. You often have to mark it because there are no obvious signs that it's there. And this mulch will have a twofold effect. It will act as a blanket during the winter to ensure that everything underground there is kept nice and warm, even if there is a rigorous winter. The other thing is it will break down and provide food for your plant, ready for when it starts to, again, push up stems and leaves in the following spring. So, as we've seen, fully hardy plants in the garden really don't need much help from us to survive the rigours of the winter. There are a few which are not quite fully hardy, and they will benefit from a little fleece or some other kind of protection in situ, which will allow light to pass to the plant, but will protect them against the worst of the winter. It'll bring the temperature up by a few degrees, just enough so that they can get through the worst of those cold times ahead. Now, there are other plants which are tender and they can't deal with the low temperatures of the winter. So what do we need to do? We need to protect them in some way, and usually we bring them indoors. So that can be in a garage, in a greenhouse, in a shed, in a conservatory, in a winter garden, or like here, in a room in the house. So that's fine. We've brought them in to protect them against the worst of the low temperatures. But what do we need to consider? There are a few things which are rather important. So let's look at them. The first thing is light. Now, I've chosen this room because it has these very, very big windows. It's north facing, so we're not worried about getting any direct sunlight on the plants, because direct sunlight can actually burn the plants and damage them. So again, something we need to consider. So in a garage or in a shed or something like that, we need to ensure there is enough light but no direct sunlight. And in things like greenhouses, sometimes the problem is having too much light. So sometimes we need to make the glass a little bit opaque by treating it with some kind of covering product, or with blinds or something like that. So we need enough light but no direct sunlight. That's the first thing. The second thing is temperature, obviously. The reason we're bringing these plants indoors is to protect them against low temperatures. However, we don't want the temperature to be too high either, because the plants can suffer from the temperatures being too high, or it may in some way disturb them, thinking it's summer again all of a sudden. So certainly here in the house, I'm going to try and keep the temperatures between 10 and 20 degrees C in this room. It's not going to be the same temperature as the rest of the house where we're living, because that would be a little bit chilly for human beings, but will be perfect for the plants that I've brought in here. So again, often the worry is having a temperature too high in the house. And again, in the garage and the shed, or in the greenhouse, maybe some little form of heating may be necessary to ensure that the temperatures don't drop too low, which is the whole point of us bringing the plants indoors in the first place. Another thing to think about, which is something we don't often think about with plants, is humidity, particularly here in the house. The heating system will not only heat the rooms, but it will often dry out the air. And plants can suffer when there isn't enough humidity in the air. So maybe from time to time I'm going to spray them with a fine mist, just so that the leaves and so on don't suffer from the dryness of the air. Okay, one more point. Watering. Now, watering is important because plants will overwinter in usually one of two ways. Either they will go into a kind of dormancy and they won't really do anything much. They'll just sit there and wait out the winter. And others may continue growing quite happily. But what they need, both of them, they need some water. Now, not the amounts of water that would give them in full summer when they're outside growing, but we need to test to ensure that the soil is moist at all times. It's an easy test. We take our forefinger, we put it into the soil up to the second joint here in the middle of your finger, and see if we can detect any moisture. If there is some moisture, we don't need to water again, but if it's bone dry, we need to water a little to ensure that the plants can get through the winter. Also, if you're indoors like here, you don't want to ruin your floors, it'd be a good idea to have some kind of protection to ensure that the water isn't spilling all over your carpets or your parquet or whatever it is you have in your house. So that's how we overwinter our plants, the considerations that are important. One thing I will add, overwintering for plants, these are perennial plants which last for years and years and years. One thing to consider also is we will have losses. No matter what we do, no matter how much we look after our lovely plants with all the considerations of what I've just discussed, there will be losses. As always, in gardening we have a few little failures and hopefully plenty of successes. So there, that's pretty much all we need to know for overwintering our lovely plants.